This episode of Critical Hit is being brought to you by HelloFresh.com. Visit HelloFresh.com and use the promo code CriticalHit30 to save $30 off your first week of deliveries. It's been a while since we've done one of these, listeners. And mainly because we are so busy having fun playing Pathfinder that it seemed ridiculous to try to interrupt an episode to do a mailbag or to spend a lot of time talking at the beginning of the episode to you. But we finished with the Weird Western. Sam did a fantastic job of it, as we talked about last week. And again, if you want to follow Sam, you can reach out to her at Samantha Nelson and the number 1, Samantha Nelson 1, and just flutter with praise over how great of a job she did with the Pathfinder game. And some people have already asked, when is it coming back? When are we going to see the adventures of these characters again? I'm not saying you're not going to hear anything from these guys in the future. But I also know we have a bunch of different games that we want to play in the future. And we have talked about this before. If you are a VIP or a Patreon member at patreon.com/major spoilers, more about that in just a little bit. You know that we've done some talking about other games we would want to play or other systems that we have out there. And over the next couple of weeks, we will be sitting down and we will finalize what the next 3 games are going to be. Right. We've got Rodrigo's Void Saga. That is coming up. That's D&D 4th edition. We've talked about systems like Dresden Files and Star Wars RPG and Starfinder, the new Pathfinder in space from Paizo Entertainment. We've talked more Call of Cthulhu stuff. We've got a bunch of stuff. And right now we are just making lists. We're looking at who has the time to build the game and all of that other cool stuff. So that is coming down the line. And of course, if you're a VIP or patron member, we will let you know well ahead of time. In fact, if you're a VIP or Patreon member, I would head over to patreon.com/major spoilers, but because before next week, when we launch the Urban Shadows campaign, I will be showing you the show art for that story arc. That's all over at patreon.com/major spoilers. But it's good to be back, and it's good to dive into the mailbag and get caught up on a bunch of emails people have sent us. Because there's a lot of it. And again, we're not, I think in the future I'm going to try to get more mailbag segments for you, because I know a lot of people enjoy the mailbag segment. You find a lot of valuable information in there, and some people find some inspiration in those mailbag discussions and just enjoy listening to us let our hair down, for those of us that still have hair, I suppose. It allows us to let our hair down and just really talk with one another for about an hour or so as we look at what you have sent us. So if you have any questions, you can send them to podcast@majorspoilers.com. I will add them into the mailbag, and very soon we will answer them for you. It's that time of year again, time when I'm super busy rushing the kids to soccer practice and setting up for Critical Hit episodes and editing podcasts and updating websites. And sometimes it just feels like there's no time to cook a good, delicious meal for the entire family. Guess what? That's totally wrong. Anyone can cook a delicious meal and feel like a pro doing it with HelloFresh. HelloFresh makes cooking fun, it makes cooking fast, and best of all, because they ship all of the ingredients directly to you, you don't have to worry about not having coriander or not having a specific ingredient that a recipe calls for. HelloFresh makes you feel like you are a pro in the kitchen. They give you all the ingredients, all the instructions. You don't have to sit there and go, oh man, I don't know how to cook. All I know how to do is warm up this can of spaghetti. No, HelloFresh is much better than that. HelloFresh is the meal kit delivery service that makes cooking more fun, so you can focus on the whole experience and not just the final plate. I've used HelloFresh before, and I've got to tell you, getting that box at your front door, you open it up, it's all ready to go in the refrigerator, and it has things divided up to say, hey, this goes with this meal, this goes with this meal. And then as you're cooking, it says, open up this packet or use this packet, and it's all pre-measured. The step-by-step instructions allow you, or really you, to make a gourmet meal in about 30 minutes. And it doesn't matter if you're a novice or a seasoned home cook. It takes about 30 minutes and you have a meal for everyone. HelloFresh sources the freshest ingredients measured to the exact quantities needed, so there's no food waste. And I really appreciate that. If you've ever wondered how much a little zest of something is, or how much a little sprinkle of something is, You don't have to worry about that anymore because HelloFresh has got you covered. HelloFresh also employs 2 full-time registered dietitians who review each recipe and ensure it is nutritionally balanced just for you. They deliver the food to your doorstep in a recyclable insulated box for free. And best of all, HelloFresh is less than $10 a meal. Think about that. Last time I went to a fast food restaurant and bought food for the entire family, it was definitely more than $10 per person. I enjoy HelloFresh, and I think you will too. HelloFresh wants to get you going right now. And when you go to HelloFresh.com and use the promo code CriticalHit30, that's Critical Hit and the number 30, you're going to save $30 off your first week of deliveries. That's it. Next thing you know, that box will arrive. You'll be able to open it up and you'll be enjoying delicious, delicious meals. What kind of meals? Sizzling southwestern chicken, pineapple pork chops, yum, ribeye steak béarnaise. I think that's how you pronounce it. All I know is get in my tummy steak. All sorts of great meals from HelloFresh.com. So again, visit HelloFresh.com. Use the promo code CriticalHit30. Save $30 off your first week of deliveries. And thank you, HelloFresh, for sponsoring this episode of Critical Hit. Welcome to Critical Hit, a Major Spoilers podcast. Thank you so much for downloading, listening, sharing this episode with a friend. And thank you, everyone who is a patron over at patreon.com/Major Spoilers. We literally could not do this without your help. As you can probably tell from the title of this episode, mailbag time. Holy cow, we haven't done this in a long time, and I have so many emails here in front of me that I haven't gone through yet. I mean, I've read all of your emails. Don't misunderstand that. But for the purposes of trying to get out a mailbag episode for you guys, I have a lot of them that I have to sort through as we're doing this show, so please forgive me just a little bit. We'll start off with an easy one, and I think this is going to be Rodrigo. Brandon writes in. Hi, Brandon. He's got a long description about some DMing that he has done and some things that he's learned and some good things and some positive things about what he's doing. Question for everyone involved. Have you ever been driven to attempt a rework of a game system you're a fan of due to an edition feeling stale and highly imbalanced? Rodrigo, start with you.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I've ever run a game system exactly as it is out of the box. Almost every game that I've played has some amount of house ruling. And I mean, we play 4th edition D&D mostly on Critical Hit, and, the skill challenges are a big part of the way that I run 4th edition, and they're mostly, they retain a little bit of the original rules, but they're mostly something I made up. So that, as important as skill challenges have become, that's a big rework of the rules that I made.
All right. Sam, what about you? You've most recently DM'd for us.
Yeah, and I wound up combining a bit of additions there, and that I used both a skill challenge and a version of the 4th Ed healing surge rules in my Pathfinder game, because there are. I just thought that the skill challenge would be fun and interesting to kind of splash in there, and was good for the doing something that was not combat, but I wanted to have kind of very rules focused. And then whereas the healing house rules, as I explained at the time, are dealing with a problem of the system, which is that healing is a full-time job that no one wants to do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Rob, what about you?
Completely reworking a system other than, the skills challenge stuff and how Rodrigo said, you kind of rework everything a little bit to suit your needs. I don't really mess with most things too much. You try more to adapt things to stuff they're not meant to be than try to rework them at all.
Yeah. I don't think we've ever had an ongoing game where we just jumped systems or additions mid-switch. I think generally we would, just probably start a new game if we were really having issues with a particular system for the most part.
Matthew, do you have any input?
That's actually where I am too. I mean, if something is really, really problematic, I'm really more of a just jump ship kind of person.
Yeah, and that may be what leads us into this next question from Ben from Anchorage, Alaska. I just jumped into D&D as a DM in 2016. I tried the Red Box, the advanced editions in the early 80s, but we lacked the maturity and experience to get much further than character creation. 5th edition is great. When I read the basic rules, I took to them immediately. The question is, or there's a couple of questions. Will Critical Hit play a full 5th edition campaign? So, we've kind of addressed this before, that for the Void Saga, that's going to stay in 4th edition because that's where it started. And until just recently, some of the characters that are part of the 4th edition campaign that we're doing were not available into 5th edition. Then there's the whole thing, Rodrigo, about trying to convert a character from 4th to 5th and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So that's what we're doing there. At some point, we may do a 5th edition campaign, although it seems like from feedback that we get and downloads that we see, a lot of people like us experimenting with a bunch of different systems at the same time. So while I'm not saying yes, I'm also not saying no, right?
No.
I'd enjoy seeing a full-fledged, well-rounded campaign idea played out in 5e on Critical Hit, my favorite D&D podcast. What leads any of our DMs to choose another edition over 5th, which may have already been answered? 4th edition is where we started, but Rodrigo or anyone else, why do you guys not like? I mean, I enjoy 5th edition. I mean, it's fine, but is there something that would make you say, "Hey, let's play this instead of 5th edition"?
I mean,
Well,
I think.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I had the, I guess, probably most recent opportunity to choose from editions, and honestly, for me, it was just I'm so familiar with Pathfinder that it was just easier, as easy a system as 5th Ed is to play and to run. My familiarity with Pathfinder is just immense, and so for me, it was not having to deal with basically any learning curve to go with a new system.
I would personally say that why I'd probably go with the previous edition over 5th edition is that the previous 2 editions provide a lot more depth of character options right out the gate than 5th edition does. I mean, even though they did add that extra axis of backgrounds, you're still kind of largely tied to your race and class out the gate, and like you don't get to customize that too much with feats, or I mean, eventually classes will get like an extra subclass pick, but some of those don't even kick in until 3rd edition. And I mean, this is all things we've talked about before, but that's largely why I would avoid.
There is just like also a staggering amount of support for 3.5 Pathfinder that like still is not there for 5th Ed. I mean, it's getting there. There are some like good third-party supplements, and like the Volo's Guide to Monsters was a really good addition because before they were very light on monsters, which I think is super, super important. But there are just so many, like there's not that much material, and some of the material there isn't great.
Yeah. The main reason, in my experience, to use an out of date or however you want to put it, an edition that is not the latest one is simply because your players are more comfortable in it. I mean, we've played 4th edition to the point where I think the 5th edition experience that we had on Critical Hit is atypical, and I don't hold 5th edition in contempt because of any issues that we may have had during that game session. But I do feel like, at least for me, I'm more comfortable in that 4th edition setting simply because we've played it for so very long. And if we're going to transition, I want everybody to transition at the same time, not just a question of how do we transition Randus, how do we transition Cat, but how do the 6 of us come together and decide this is a whole new engine, a whole new system, a whole new thing, and it needs to be a new thing that we're all doing together, which is why, the transitioning to Pathfinder or the other gaming systems that we've been using, works for me because we're all going together, even though we have different levels of experience.
What is it about, just a show of hands really quick, and you can say yay, nay, but who prefers the high fantasy setting over anything else that's out there?
Nay.
Over anything else?
Big nay.
Yeah, so Matthew says nay.
nay-ish. I don't know. I do like fantasy, and I prefer high fantasy to like, gritty, low fantasy.
Yeah, grimdark.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I'd still probably go with other settings.
Rob? Sam?
I mean, I like fantasy. It depends. Like, I don't know. I don't know that I'd have a. I've played in a lot of stories in fantasy D&D worlds, but like that's the thing, is that can be so many different things. Like even within it, you could have a high fantasy like Planescape game that's like weird and sci-fi, or a high fantasy game that's like a demon invasion that's like you're in the Crusades, or so I'm very hesitant to dismiss the entire genre, because there's just so much you can do within fantasy.
Right.
I guess like I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of like straight up adaptation of Lord of the Rings, but I do like a lot of like the core material that is there in Pathfinder and D&D.
Rodrigo, you were going to say something.
I mean, I like fantasy just fine. I am tired in general of the sort of like Tolkien-ish.
Yeah.
Yep, Tolkien-esque stuff. So anytime somebody's like, hey, here's some fantasy stuff, I'm like, oh, cool. It's like elves and dwarves and halflings. I'm like, maybe talk to me about it later.
Yeah.
But it's like in fantasy, you can do a lot of stuff. It's like, it's like Steven Universe is like barely sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's like it's mostly fantasy. It's basically magic. And it's set kind of in the real world, but it's mostly fantasy. It's like that amount is reasonable. It's like it's mostly magical adventures in space. It's like that's that sort of stuff is fine.
Rob, did you have some thoughts then that you gathered?
Yeah. After Sam had said just the variety that you can do with high fantasy, I'm definitely for high fantasy. I just don't. I don't like seeing the same
That's
Lord
why
of the Rings.
it's so disappointing seeing the same old Tolkien races trotted out again and again.
Yeah, so
there is all this possibility.
Yeah, so here's kind of my answer. I do enjoy reading like the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Sword of Shannara and all of that, but at the same time, I also like Dresden Files. I really love, like the 1940s detective stuff. Yeah. Chandler and all those guys. I have enjoyed westerns here and there. I enjoy superheroes, and my reading habits when I'm reading will sometimes stay in the Ross McDonald detective novels. I would go through like 5 of those at a time. And then at the end of 5 of those novels, I'd be like, okay, I'm ready for a break from detectives for a while. Kind of. Let me go check out the Dresden Files, which is technically a detective, but it's more like urban
detective
fantasy.
With vampires.
Yeah. And so you've got that going on. And so that's really cool. And then I'll listen to some sci-fi stuff or read some sci-fi stuff, or I'll read superhero comic books, and I'll kind of weave in and out. And sometimes I like biography stuff and real world type stuff. And I think right now that's kind of how I like my RPGs is I've played high fantasy and I've enjoyed high fantasy, and I can't wait till we get back to Void Saga. But at the same time, what is an RPG game in a Western setting? What is it in space? What is it in this? What is a detective? What is this urban fantasy stuff going on? Yeah. I want to experience all of those kind of at different times. And yes, there at some point, once I've tried the sampler platter, I will say, you know what? I really prefer this one over all else.
Yeah. Like we have this. Yeah, we have this conversation a lot on the Major Spoilers podcast, or really we used to, because we're actually living right now in a very good time for non-superhero comics. But we talk about a lot how, to people that don't read comics a lot, comics are equivalent to superheroes, right? Like it's like the Avengers are out and Spider-Man is like, oh, look at all these comic book movies. And it's like comics does not equal superheroes. It's just that the genre originated in comics, and they're very closely tied together. It's the same thing, right? D&D is the most popular role-playing game, so you often see it. I just saw something where it's like people are using, like, inmates at this prison are playing D&D, and it's like helping with their social skills.
It was totally Pathfinder.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, exactly that, right? It's like, it's like at no point did anybody think to say role-playing games, right? It's just automatically synonymous.
Yeah, it's like generic. It's like Kleenex as opposed to tissues.
Yep, exactly. Right. Exactly. So, in general, role-playing games as a medium aren't well known to the general public, so it's very difficult to convey to people that there isn't just one, and that you can play literally any genre. You can play ones where there isn't combat. You can play ones like there's role-playing games where you can just play a sitcom.
Yeah,
and that's it.
Yeah, and we kind of go into a bunch of different systems. Over on our Patreon, we had a bonus episode where we basically quiz Brian. We say, here's the game we want to play, and he picked out the system for us. We tried to stump him. So you can go find that, which kind of leads into this next email, and it's just too good of an email to pass up. But it's from Kaylor, who says, I'm on my second listen through of the Critical Hit series, and as I type this, I'm listening to the ending of The Lords of the Feywild. When I first started listening to Critical Hit, I was going through a really rough patch of my life, and your show helped me honestly more than you could imagine. I think it's amazing that you provide this service to the public free of charge, although it takes so much of your time to create. Even though it's free, it is worth so much to me. Paying $25 a month via Patreon it's a no-brainer. My question, if I'm not a wealthy man and I can spare $25 a month to Major Spoilers, why can't the rest of Critical Hittites spare just $2? It blows my mind that people will spend $4 on coffee, but not even $2 a month on Major Spoilers. Sigh. TLDR, you guys are great. All the Major Spoilers content is great. Keep up the great work. Sincerely, a huge fan, Kaylor. Well, thank you for that email. It means a lot to us when people listen to this show and it helps them out through troubled times or through rough patches that they may be having. And we certainly appreciate all of our patrons, no matter how much that they are willing to contribute. But Kaylor does point something out, that it does cost us time, effort, energy, equipment. I just recently redid a whole revamping of computer gear here because a bunch of stuff was failing left and right. We needed something stable and secure. That costs money. And we want to keep shows like Critical Hit and Top 5 and the Major Spoilers podcast free month after month. And if every one of you listening to this show right now took time to go over to patreon.com/Major Spoilers and put in just $2, if you think that we did the math one time. 4 episodes a month at $2 is how much per episode? 50 cents.
50 cents an episode.
If you think that these episodes are worth 50 cents an episode, then head over there and sign up for the $2 a month. That's all we need to keep the lights on. But here's the thing. We just mentioned a bonus episode that's over there for people where we quiz Brian on these games, which is really a lot of fun. And we ought to do that again sometime really soon. If you pay a little bit more, like a $5 a month, $5 is a sweet spot. I did an average. A little behind the scenes stuff. I did an average of what people are paying, and right now, $7 is the average. From the low end to the high end, 7 is that average. So even if you can contribute $5 a month, about $1 an episode, that goes a long way to buying the equipment, the gear, the game systems that we need to do this stuff, and to get money to everyone who is participating in this as well. If we had every single one of you do $5 a month, not only would you get access to bonus content, wow, we could probably hire everybody here full time if everybody did $5 a month.
Nice.
So, listeners, as Kaylor is asking, and I know, and here's the thing, I know not everyone can spare $2 a month, right? Mm-hmm. I understand that, and so it's not a pressure to saying, well, if you're not paying, you're not contributing. But if you can, then think about it. Patreon.com/Major Spoilers. A lot of other good stuff over there. T-shirts, art, original art that is just being knocked out of the park that you get prints for.
Amazing
Alex
stuff.
Diakon is doing that, and it's fantastic stuff.
And Condor Man. Don't forget Condor Man.
And Condor Man is doing that stuff. Hi, Torkel Tones. I'm new to DMing and have started a game with 2 friends and my boyfriend. I got super deep into world building and also set up mini origin stories for each story. I thought I was prepared enough to go forward, and both friends' origin stories went fine. However, once it got to my boyfriend, I found it hard to DM for him. He's very fast talker and thinker and can be impatient. We talked about this after the session, and he was very responsive to trying different strategies. One idea was to co-DM with him. I can give him my ideas so far about the world and we can collaborate and trade off sessions. However, I don't want to ruin the experience for him by telling him everything. How do you guys as DMs usually handle telling your characters about the world? My game idea involves the characters traveling between different worlds, so the cosmology and gods are a part of the narrative, kind of like the gods of the void. How do I balance clarifying my setting and keeping the story interesting? That's from Anna.
Well, that's a tough one.
If you co-DM, then you have to give him all the information. Otherwise, at some point, he's going to be like, and then a purple dragon shows up, and then you're going to be like, well, there are no purple dragons in this world, and then you're going to have to deal with it right then and there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you're both going to run that game, then you're both going to have all information. So if you want to keep the surprises, then you might have to, I would say you should keep him as a player, and, just talk to him about, definitely make sure that everybody's staying in character. That's a big deal. It's very easy for people that naturally dominate the conversation and people that are naturally fast talkers to go into that mode when they are going into it. So just as the game master, you always have the ability to be like, hold on a second, give me a diplomacy roll. Like,
right.
You can always slow down the action and be like, okay, hang on, give me a diplomacy roll. Well, that's so. Hey, you tiny shy person who's playing a bard, you give me a diplomacy roll. Oh, that was better. You talk now. You can actually use the rules to your advantage to kind of slow things down. It sounds like he's excited about the game, so that's good, and it sounds like he's open to trying things out. But I think that, again, if you making him another game master and also with like not having him have all the information is kind of just asking for a misstep in some aspect of the game. Either he's going to move your game in a direction that you don't want, and then you're going to have to rewrite your notes or tell him no, and nobody's going to like that, or at some point or at some point he's going to like kind of spoil things for himself by wandering into somewhere that you hadn't already prepared.
Yeah.
That said, you could totally do collaborative world building without actually co-DMing.
Right.
Like if you think what would help him is having like a really elaborate backstory, you can give him like a corner of the world to design, and then feel free to take what he says about it and then mess with it. It's like, oh, well, there's this like secret society that he invented that does this. It's like, well, maybe they actually also do that.
Right. It can be very difficult to run a game with someone that you are involved with, someone who is your significant other, or someone that you have a really strong connection with, or that you have even a tumultuous relationship with. And you have to ask yourself, is the fact that your friend's origins went fine, but his didn't, is that a function of the way that you interact with him more as, the significant other than as the dungeon master? And at that point, because I will echo what Rodrigo said and emphasize that in Matthew's opinion, don't co-GM. I don't believe that co-GMing is something that is usually successful, and I feel, in my experience, it leads to more problems than it will ever resolve, especially since what this really breaks down to is finding a game mastering style or a game control style that's going to work with what your significant other is doing. And it may also be worth letting him know that when he was fast talking and it did give you some issues as a game master, and just treat him as much as you can as any other player, and say, here's the feedback that I have for the way that interaction went, and here's some things that I would like to see about going forward. But that's just me. I'm old and mean.
So, well, and maybe that is a product of, your past experience, Matthew, with the way the game was set up and wanting to just a single DMGM. But I actually receive a lot of emails from people, and I've read a couple of them here already without going into the entire details of stuff, where people are actually co-GMing games or switching back and forth. You know, hey, you're going to cover the first part, I'll cover the second part, and we'll switch back and forth.
Yeah, it's something people do.
Yeah.
It's not. It's something that's possible, but like any group activity, it requires a lot of communication. Right. I've never done it because, as you guys know, I'm a huge control freak when it comes to role-playing games. So I don't know if I could do it.
Marriage forbid, sir.
Yeah, as you all know.
You ran more than a couple games for the Town Bicycle.
Oh, I did. Well, I guess that's true. So I've done it, but that wasn't my setting. So I guess, yes, in that sense, I have done it because I was kind of invited to do it in someone else's playground. So there you go. I guess I have done it.
So what about the rest of you? Sam, you're a big RPG nerd.
Mm-hmm.
And you and your husband both are. Do you guys team up with your friends, or is this strictly this is mine and that is yours and never shall we share our
like I said, we do
Dungeon Master screen.
Co-world building. Like Kevin likes to call me his idea pinata, because he just like pokes me until I come up with ideas.
Nice.
But so I've been in a few games that were co-GM'd, and I put them along the lines of like the same realm as pickup games, where it's like, oh, we're gonna have like whoever can show up tonight will be part of the party. In that, I don't think they really work very well. And like again, in a different sort of circumstance, when it's like light character, pure dungeon crawly, light plot, light world building, I could see that working. But like the issue I always have with pickup games is like, okay, well today Mike, Dan, and Allison could play, but next week it's Mike, Air, and Dan. So Allison's character goes, and so yeah, I mean the co-DMing is like if you have very different spheres in like the same world, maybe that can work. But like people have different tones, they have different goals, and unless, like you said, it's like I've seen co-DMing work in, say, a LARP situation where you have multiple people all really working together to tell the same story that are like all on the same side and no one is actually acting as a player. They're all just playing different NPCs, and I think that works great. But taking turns as player and DM, I am not a big fan of personally.
A lot of it depends on how much control you want over what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. Excuse me. Like it said, Rodrigo did do the Town Bicycle, where it was just kind of a different DM any given week. And what
system did you use for that?
That was 3.5
days.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was when we were doing 3.5. I mean, it doesn't matter what the system is if you're running the same.
But even then, I mean, in my game, the party ended up coming back with like a dozen goblins, and like no one ever did anything with them. There were just like a dozen goblins in the background. You know, it's like so like the next game master like has to deal with those goblins, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
or he doesn't.
Yeah,
or he doesn't.
Yeah. So, were you going to say something else, Matthew? Did you have something else to add?
I did, and I want to make sure that I'm saying this delicately. I think that there is a point where everyone has considered co-GMing when dealing with a player who is distinctive, who is not necessarily divisive, but someone who's very forceful. And I don't think that just based on what I've heard, again, I don't know the whole situation, that co-GMing is actually the answer to this issue. I think this is more of a DM to player issue bordering into a significant other to significant other issue. And I think that the co-GMing is really a compromise that's going to leave everybody unsatisfied. So.
Yeah. Sometimes we get emails and we don't get to mailbags until things have ended, but I want to read this anyway because they may have completed this Kickstarter or you may be wanting to look them up. But this is from Melissa, who says, I've been a religious follower of Critical Hit since about October 2014, and I have to thank you all so much for creating an amazing environment and entertainment. When I first came across your podcast, I was obsessed. I listened to every single episode from the beginning, and when I got to the end, I listened to them all again. I've been a VIP supporter for a year or so now, and I've recommended Critical Hit countless times. I even proudly announced to new partners and or acquaintances, yes, my favorite podcast is a D&D Real Play podcast, and yes, I'm happy to write that down for you. It's a staple of my Saturday morning ritual, and I can't thank you enough for all the hard work you each have done in creating such amazing, fun, and informative content. I'm going to break out for just a moment and say that there are people all over the place that will listen to Critical Hit. One of our other listeners sucked me into a Twitter conversation where she's like, oh, I used to live in, Portugal or Puerto Rico? Portugal, I think. And she has just moved to Japan. And she's like, I wonder if there's any Critical Hit listeners here. And I pulled up my stats and I said, according to our stats, yes, there are 33 people in Japan that are listening to us right now. Nice. It's not a lot, but again, so if people are wondering, where can you find other Critical Hit listeners and you may be in another country, it's just the unfortunate byproduct that our podcast is in English, that countries that speak English have a higher percentage of listeners than countries that English is not their native language. So while we do have people in Colombia, and we do have people in Argentina, and we do have people in, where's in Africa? It's South Africa, but there's also up around the hump there in Africa. We've got a couple of those countries that are tuning in. Also Germany, Finland, Russia, China. There's people all over the world. Maybe not as much, but there's people all over. But I'm really glad when someone like Melissa will go around and say, hey, have you heard about our podcast? I'd like to give you a pamphlet on this right now. Maybe we should print those up and put something up where people can print those out.
Put them in the bus stations with the Chick track.
Yeah. So back into Melissa's email. I have a friend who's been working with her husband and a few others in Washington to decide a LARP game right up in the alley of Weird Western and Yellow Light, and I thought you might find it interesting. It's called Call of the Void, and their team is currently working on a Kickstarter to get the game rolling. The Kickstarter probably is already launched and done with by the time you listen to this, listeners, but if you're in the Washington area and you like to LARP, look up Call of the Void on their Facebook page and spread the good news if you would like to lend your support. So thank you again for truly everything I've expressed about and more over the years. Critical Hit was the first podcast I ever listened to and will always hold a special place in my heart for that and for the lifelong passion for tabletop role-playing it spawned as well. So much love and appreciation. Thank you, Melissa. So let's continue the love. Hello, Rob, Rodrigo, Steven, Sam, Brian, and last but not certainly least, Matthew. My name is Josh, and I must confess, y'all got me hooked on D&D, and I'm so glad that I found your podcast. I love listening to your characters' craziness, particularly in the episodes Smith Returns, Poof, They Were Gone, The Twilight Guardian, Cobalt Alley, She Who Slumbers in Agony, A Fate Worse Than Ket. I forgot I called that one out. I forget some of these titles I've come up with. The Tempest Toad versus Trell and the Nearly Deadmen, the Modern City Saga, Basalt, and the Team Box Troll, among others. I'm currently working through the Weird Western Saga. In fact, I'm listening to the Swamp of the Despair episode as I write this. I love the posse's preposterous predicaments, and I think that Sam is one of the awesomest, craziest, most hilarious DMs I've ever encountered. Keep up the great work, guys, and holy crap, I just got a critical hit. Love and jocular fun from Josh. P.S. Oh, yeah, he does ask about Weird Western character sheets. We don't really have those available up on the Patreon or VIP sites. Right now, the only things, and we even have almost impossible to get our Call of Cthulhu character sheets up there because of the way that the PDF is embedded, and you can only open it up in a true PDF and then it won't print out correctly. So yeah, we don't have the Weird Western character sheets or the Call of Cthulhu character sheets for our patron or VIP members, but the Critical Hit stuff, Modern City stuff, all of that stuff is up on patreon.com/major spoilers. Let's see. Oh, I've got a question for Sam. Just as yes. This is not an email question, but something that I've noticed when I've seen your game nights. And this can be then spread out to everyone because we've kind of talked about this before, but it needs to be brought up again. You and your husband have quite a collection of those. Is it the Dungeon Forge?
Dwarven
Forge things.
Nice.
Do you use those a lot in your gameplay?
And so the thing that probably made me the saddest about Weird Western was that it was on Roll20, and I tried coming up with like some ways to like set up a Dwarven Forge setup and then like take a picture of it and upload it, and it just didn't work. I love Dwarven Forge.
So have you used any other stuff? Have you ever looked at like some of the 3D printed stuff that's up on Thingiverse, or are you so locked in? Have you built your own little sets and models, or so
I haven't built any of my own. I am don't have the patience for like the construction or the painting. Though I have, like, every time I go to Gen Con, I look out for things that kind of like, because once you get invested in something like Dwarven Forge, you're looking for things that will sync up to it or fit on the same board. So it has to kind of be on the same scale. So usually, just kind of looking around for cool little things. Like, I get a lot of mileage out of basically small miniature, like, it's like, that's a pot, or that's a tree, or just little kind of accessories that make a room look more interesting. Like, and some of those are for Dwarven Forge, and some of those are many other assorted companies that I've found at cons or on Kickstarter or on like even crafter websites, that it's like, well, here's like a dragon's hoard and it actually has a pile of gold in the corner. So I find that it's really fun to play with, and B, really fun to like play with as a player, to just like see these setups.
Yeah, because you guys have a giant table.
We do,
and I thought at one point I saw that entire table, which has got to be like 6 feet by 4 feet or something like that, or bigger.
Yep.
And that thing was covered with the miniature models.
Yes.
And that does look like a lot of fun to play. And I do enjoy that 3D experience of that. Sometimes I find it I definitely find it more enjoyable than, like a drawn-on map, or the cardboard tiles that you can get from Wizards of the Coast and from other places. But what about the rest of you? I mean, some of you are just happy to roll out a mat and put a marker down. Some of you really enjoy Roll20 and just, hey, we're just going to draw it out there.
The more elaborate the map can be, the cooler it gets.
It can also sometimes be a detriment, though, the more detailed it is. But... yeah, I mean, it's definitely neat. I mean, predominantly we have just used the dry erase or the wet erase mats.
Oh, no, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, because it's fast and it's easy and it gets set up and it gets the job done.
We still use that for like plenty of like. We ran a whole campaign that my husband ran, and it was entirely on like wet erase or not even grids, especially when you get into like things like 5th ed, where it's like it's a lot easier because things are less, you're less concerned about area of effect spells and attacks of opportunity. Yeah. So like you can just be theater of the mind and don't need that. Plus, like, especially if you're just having a very small encounter or something that doesn't have a lot of flourishes, just throwing down some tiles or a grid is nice. But yeah, I think the setup that you saw the picture of was for this like truly epic fight where we fought like a like red dragon sorceress and an archdiv, which are like this evil genie kind thing in Pathfinder, in like the heart of the city that we also had to save and rescue the people. So for that, like that kind of epic scale thing, like an epic scale setup is really satisfying.
So was that all just set up for just the encounter, or was there things like you had to search around in a house to find a trapdoor or to find a weapon or two?
It was an encounter that had like puzzles built into it.
Okay.
So, so like you actually, so one of the caveats of the fight was that the dragon sorceress couldn't be killed while there was a fire burning. And so she had hidden fires in like all these different buildings that we had to then put out in order to actually kill her.
Okay, cool. Rodrigo or Matthew, do you want to share some thoughts on your play areas?
I think that as someone who, at one point, part of my job was taking care of the communal tiles and towers and trees and things in our gaming area at the store, you do kind of come to that point, and, this happened to me with my comic book collection too, of, I love all these things, they are wonderful things, but dear God, where am I going to put them?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that to me is kind of the downside of it, in that if I were to go down a Dwarven Forge rabbit hole, I would likely not come back up, because you get to a point where you're like, well, I need this, and in case I need that, I might need one of these and two of these and this thing and this paddle ball and the chair and this plant. And you kind of get to a point where you have to cut yourself short. And for me, it's wonderful to have those, and it can be immersive to the game when used correctly, but also it's hubcaps on a tractor, in as much as they are there, they are wonderful, and they do have a function, but then there's also the point of what are you going to do with them when you're done? And that question always comes down to, we're just going to stick them in Stacy's office, and then I'm going to get yelled at for the next 5 years.
Yeah, we have many IKEA containers.
Right? Yeah, lots and lots of plastic tubs.
Yeah. Yep. I have that problem with certain Legos that are all over the place. Rodrigo.
I mean, I like them, but I'm personally not very crafty or handy. So, anytime I've ever tried to do stuff like that, I just I'm not very good at it, and B, kind of give up very quickly. I find that putting stuff like that together kind of boring. So I just generally don't. That, and rolling out a mat or doing something online gives me a lot of freedom to just kind of change things on the fly a little bit easier. And I know that a lot of these things are modular anyway, so obviously there are a lot of changes that you can make. But yeah, just to kind of be this is now a corridor.
Right. Yeah, no, that I if you're trying to get something out fast and you're trying to keep the gameplay moving, I think, having a mat and drawing it out is really cool. Or if you have tiles, because the nice thing about tiles is you can change them around and flip them around and do different things with them. On the Roll20 system, Roll20 and Wizards of the Coast have teamed up, and have done some amazing things with the 5th edition stuff, where you can buy, pre-made maps, and you can buy little tiles, and you can build your own dungeons all in Roll20, and it's got really cool art design, and it's got tokens, little pogs, virtual pogs for all of your characters and the monsters that you're going to encounter, and then you click on the monster and you've got all the stats that pop up. I mean, it's really, really cool stuff if you guys want to check that out. But for the last couple of years, I mean...
And there's a flip the table button.
Yeah, there's a flip the table button. And I love the Dwarven Forge stuff. I think it looks so cool. I've tried my hand at... I think it was maybe a precursor to Dwarven Forge before they started doing their Polystone stuff, where you could buy
a mold.
Not a mold, but you could buy a printout of a building, and then you cut out. You cut it out, and then you fold it up, and you do some papercraft stuff. And I tried my hand at that, and I thought that was really cool. And now that I have a 3D printer, I love going and printing out tiles to kind of lay out, and walls and pillars and all sorts of things. It's cheaper than a Dwarven Forge. But then again, you have to paint it and do all that stuff, whereas Dwarven Forge comes all that way. But if you're someone that likes the little miniatures, I really enjoy that 3D environment stuff, because you can do some crazy stuff with
Legos,
that.
Man, you can do it with Legos.
Could do it with Legos. I've seen people do Lego minifigs as their characters, so...
The 5th Ed Roll20 stuff is cool. I actually considered using Strahd's banner as the basis for Miller banner, but
cool.
It didn't have quite the look that I was looking for.
Yeah, as of this recording, the one that was just released was Tomb of Annihilation, and that's a pretty cool pack of stuff that you get with that. So go check it out. It does cost you. You do have to buy it through the Roll20 system, but it is worth checking out. I think this person's name is Blarg. At least that's how they signed off on the email, Blarg.
That may be from my wife, actually.
I'm currently in the process of getting a 5e game up and running with some friends. All of us first time to tabletop games. The game will be a typical sword and sorcery D&D fantasy, but set in an Old West type region country. I'd like to give my players a map of the area so they can keep a general idea of where they are, so they have a visual reference on where I want to keep certain people, items, places, and events. For example, where the land of the Lost-esque Valley, where they will fight an evil necromancer, etc. My problem is I don't have any sort of art skills and don't really know enough about geography to make a map. I know I could just hand wave it as it just works this way because of magic, but would like to avoid that if I can. Do you have any tips when it comes to making a world map? Are there any programs I should look into that could help me with this, or should I open up Paint and have at it? That's question number 1. There is actually a program, and I may have replied back to this person already, but there is a program that lets you build a virtual world where basically it'll randomize a map and you can tell it these are where I want certain areas, or I want this to be a desert area or whatever, and it will create it for you.
There's a number of random generator things, if that's the route you want to go. I've looked at the ones where you lay down basically various tiles and whatnot to build a map.
Yeah, I've seen ones for hex exploration for Pathfinder that will let you build a hex map pretty well.
One easy idea might be just start with circles. Like, here's this circle is the jungle area, and inside this circle is where the Valley of the Land of the Lost Dinosaurs are going to be, and here's where this city is. And then as you start building that out, it's just that way. I don't know. I mean, personally, I like it when someone puts a lot of thought, like Rodrigo does in his maps, puts a lot of thought into, okay, well, the mountains are here and the rivers run down, so the rivers are going to run this way, and then those are going to empty out into a delta, which empties out into the sea. And so when you think about those kinds of things, it makes sense, and I appreciate that. But sometimes maybe you just have the ocean butts right up against a mountain, and right built alongside the cliff of a mountain is where your village is at, and maybe that's how you just do it. I think, personally, I think you can do whatever you want, however works best for your campaign that you're creating.
There's always the option that we did back in the day, which is to say the early 1980s, late 1970s. Find a book, old book, buy a book, steal a book, don't steal a book, but find a book that has maps in it and adjust those maps to your liking or to your needs, or, steal and pilfer those maps for what you need, and then stick it in paint and just wing that mother.
Yeah.
And because, I mean, if it's in your head, you have a way to express yourself. Anybody, any single person in the entire universe can draw. You may not draw to where you think you're good at it, and you may have, your mean friend Steven poke fun at you, and these things will happen.
Oh no, your penmanship is perfect.
I know it is, right? I'm pretty freaking awesome. But what it really comes down to is it's in your head. You can get it out one way or the other. Even if you have to, carve it in mashed potatoes on your kitchen
this
table.
Means
like
something. That kind of leads into the second part of this person's question, but I want to get to Rodrigo, who has made a lot of maps that we've shared with people.
Tell us about the rivers, Rodrigo.
Well, I mean, that is an important consideration. So here's the story. I don't know if I've shared it on Critical Hits. But when I made the map for the Central Continent, the rivers don't come from mountains, and that's where rivers come from. Rivers flow down from mountains, and there's just rivers that don't connect to any actual mountains. They don't have to. They could come from like higher plains or whatever, but it's like when I made that map, I didn't know where rivers usually come from. Also, like deserts and mountains generate a lot of of climate zones, and in the Central Continent, there's clearly a lot of magical stuff going on because there's almost no mountains, and there's still all these like climate zones, right? So, learning about that stuff is nice for your maps. Definitely there's kind of like this basic geography stuff that you can just learn from Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and type in desert, it'll actually give you some basic stuff about deserts. Just type in tundra and it'll give you some basic stuff about that, and how they're kind of these areas are created. There's always more to learn. And then the other thing is practice. I actually found that I really enjoy drawing maps. I am finally managed to claw out an amount of time in my schedule so that I'm actually running a non-podcast game now. And I spent a really long time working on a map for it, and I have probably 10, 15 different iterations of the map that I wanted to use for it, until I got one that I actually felt comfortable with. And it is just if you look through my notebook, it's just 50 different squiggly, and that's what it looks like, right? It's just squiggle, 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 because that's what coastlines look like. And I was like, oh, well, maybe there should be a river here or something. So just make a note, and then, just kind of go back and look at what you did before and try it again. Because like a weirdo, I always draw in pen. So here's another note: draw in pencil. That's going to make things a lot easier.
And if you're using Fifth Edition, the seasonal campaigns like Tomb of Annihilation, Frost Giant's Fury, those kinds of things. Especially Tomb of Annihilation has a giant world map in the back of the book that is huge. That you can again maybe adapt it to what your game is. But Blarg goes on to say, my other issue is that I've always had trouble getting my ideas out of my head and onto paper and getting them fleshed out. While I know the general plot of the game, will be the players are super bounty hunters going after the worst of the worst, only to find hidden connection between these villains as they go along. I'm not quite sure of the finer details of things, like how to introduce them to the idea of being bounty hunters, or how to implement that connection without beating them over the head with it, and what exactly is the end game of this hidden foe, and so on. What are some things I can do to help outline and detail the plot as I move forward with it? One thing I would say is there is a fantastic app called Scrivener. And Scrivener is really designed for people who are writing books, comic books, movies, those kinds of things. But they have a lot of templates that you can download for other things. And when it comes to like the NaNoWriMo November Writing Month, they have a world building template that goes through and asks you, okay, who are your main characters? What is the plot? What is this world about? How does this world work? And it just goes into super fine details, and it's really designed to help you think about your broader world and also help you outline your story and how are your characters getting from point A to point B. So an app like Scrivener might be something that will help you organize your ideas and get them out there, because it asks you very direct questions like, are there magical beasts in this world? Yes or no? Describe them. Right? So that can help you maybe come up with those ideas and get them out of your head and onto at least a computer, where then you could flesh them out later. Rob?
That's a great plan. I lost track of what the question was.
Getting the ideas out of his head and getting them fleshed out and onto paper, and how to get forward with that.
I was actually going to go on the other part of, don't worry about if your players aren't figuring out the connection.
Mm-hmm.
If you're putting in seeds and they're just not picking up on them, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're, you've got a specific thing going on. They're bounty hunters. They're going after the guys. There's not a ton of reason for them to deviate from the plot from what you've described. So don't worry about them not entirely catching it until the end. If they end up not getting it and it just kind of slams into them all at the end, then the reveal is all that much sweeter.
Yeah. I mean, maybe if they're working for somebody that's a hidden connection between villains, maybe as you're taking down one of your bounties, oh no, I'm not the one you want, you're working for someone evil, Rodrigo, do you have some ideas on how to get your ideas out your head and onto a working game?
Yeah. You can write them down, you can draw them. If you're concerned about, just kind of getting those like finer details, because it sounds like this person has like the basic premise of their game, and they're like, okay, so what I want to happen is A, B, and C, and then just getting those like those connections in between those major plot points. Good ways of doing that is basically to putting in these seeds of what those plot points are going to be. So you want there to be a connection. So, for example, with the bounty hunter thing, they can bust up someone and they have a weird tattoo, and they bust up someone else and that other person has a weird tattoo. And then, like Rob said, there's a very good chance that the players aren't going to put it together, right? And if they don't, then that is a clue that is still out there floating in the ether that might come back later. You can then try something else. You can try having somebody send them on a bounty against somebody that hasn't done anything wrong. And they're like, well, why are they sending us after this person, right? A good way to get players interested in a mystery is to put incongruous things in front of them. To be like, okay, we're bounty hunters and we hunt down criminals. Okay, it's like, well, now they're sending us after this person who's not supposed to be a criminal, or have a mission be extremely easy. Right? It's like, usually there's like a big fight and there's like all these guys and they come after us. It's like, why was this so easy? That might actually get the players asking questions. Establish what a usual bounty hunter mission is first. Like, have their bounty guy be like, hey guys, got a new bounty for you, here you go. They go, they fight a guy, they bring him back, gives him some money. Maybe do that a couple times. Once they're used to that, then have the plot hit them. Have like, this bounty went sideways, why? Then the next bounty is like, this one went a little weird, why? like have the person return and have the bounty head, like have them flash something to the bounty head, and they like him be like, "Okay, you are free to go, my man. Never mind, that was wrong." It's like, why? It's like just start establishing things where that pattern that they're used to is now breaking for some reason. That'll get them asking questions, and you can go from there.
Sam, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in a plot like that is for you to always just know what each of your, I guess, antagonists are doing. So if you're creating this network of villains, then you want to have a really clear idea of who they are and what their deal is from the get-go so that you can seed things. Because if it's like this one villain is on this bounty list because they run like this illegal smuggling operation, then, if there's PCs are looking for a rare item, then they might wind up unintentionally doing business with them and then realize that they've supported that enterprise later. And likewise, if they have some, two antagonists that are like jockeying for position against each other, they might see like one of their minions turn up dead and be like, huh, that's interesting. And so really, yeah, keeping track of for yourself, keeping meticulous notes is really what you want to do to be able to see that information.
Excellent.
And that's really good too, because then if the players make a weird left turn, you already have that, right? Like the players make a strange decision and you're like, they would walk right into the wheelhouse of Smuggler Man. So right. Now I have all of this stuff prepared. I was going to do this 2 games from now, but I can just bring this in now, right?
Yep.
It's like players, like having those characters fleshed out and ready to go allows you to just bring stuff to the fore whenever the players just wander into it.
Yep. James says, first of all, thanks so much for making hours of entertainment that I've really enjoyed. Also, Twerk is the best. Hope he's still around. Don't know if he's still around because he was never heard from again. Now on to my question. I'm thinking of starting a game that is set in the Magic the Gathering world of Theros, or at least start it there, with before any of the characters are planeswalkers. I was wondering what I could have certain races flavored as, since most of the races don't exist in that world, like elves and satyrs. What is those?
Satyrs.
Yes.
Satyrs.
Thanks in advance.
Exists.
Well, it's spelled as satires, but we're not going to make fun of James for that. Rodrigo, I'm going to start off with you because you had just tweeted out the other day about if you were going to do Magic the Gathering as an RPG game, you actually wouldn't set it in Theros. You were going to set it somewhere else.
Yeah, if I was going to do any Magic setting, if I was going to run an RPG in any Magic setting, it would be Alara, because it's probably the widest possible one. That's WIDEST.
Right.
Okay.
Broadest one.
Broadest, yes.
That?
Deep depth.
Yeah, just because it's kind of 5 settings in one. As far as Theros, do they say what? I'm guessing this is for D&D. Did they say what?
Well, just
did it say the edition?
No, it didn't. Just at RPG.
So, if it's for D&D, I think satyrs are pretty foresty, so they can be your elves. And what else was unique to Theros? There were like merfolk, right? So
yeah,
if you can find yourself some water genasi types.
Minotaurs. You can use your half orcs for them if
half orcs if you're playing D&D next and they haven't come out with them. If you're playing anything before that, you can probably find some either straight up Minotaur or some big burly race like a Goliath or something to cover for that. So I would do that. As far as like the Magic system, I mean, Magic the Gathering, even in Theros, was pretty much like, has that kind of like point and click zappy spell type stuff. So you really don't need to reflavor a lot of D&D stuff. And I mean, unlike almost every other setting, your clerics fit right in on Theros. So it's probably the best place for divine magic if you're gonna set a D&D game anywhere.
Yeah, Rob, you want to weigh in? You're a big Magic the Gathering fan.
Rodrigo said you just kind of have to figure out which way to reskin any given character. or any given race for the native races at Theros. There's usually only about 5 or 6 other than humans.
Mm-hmm. Usually about 1 for each color.
Yeah. But Theros is a pretty easy one to reskin, other than the fact that they have no elves or goblins. They don't have a lot of the classic stuff you've got, or classical stuff.
They need goblins. Definitely goblins.
So this is an interesting, I don't want to do any, name dropping here, but there's a certain games company that develops, things Lovecraftian.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Hi, my name's Corey. I work for such and such a company. I'm a big fan of Call of Cthulhu. One of my players suggested the Yellow Light run to me. It was what made him want to play Call of Cthulhu, and I see why. Great run, guys. Kudos. I'm so enjoying it. Have 2 more to go, and I see to see where it all ends up. Aside from wanting to extend my appreciation to the keepers and players, I was wondering what book Yellow Light is out of. Was it a book, or was it an original scenario? Really loved it. Wanted to keep that one on my arsenal for a possible future run for folks. I checked Secrets of Los Angeles and Ripples of Carcosa books, no dice. Be very eager to know what that one was out of. And I replied back, Yellow Light is an all-original campaign for those of you who listened to that with Dr. Brad Will running that. And we did do a rather long discussion on one of our Finally Friday episodes around the same time that ended. I couldn't tell you what episode it was specifically. But Brad and I go into how he came up with the idea, because it was one that he was working on for about a year. He's like, oh yeah, I would probably do it like this. So if you look up any of the Lovecraft, Cthulhu, Yellow Sign, Finally Friday episodes, more than likely it's got Brad on it. And more than likely we are talking about that. But I had written, and Corey and I and some other people from this gaming company, hi Dustin, exchanged a bunch of stuff back and forth. And so it's really nice when games companies know who we are and reach out to us. Wizards of the Coast does the same thing. We've got, all of our 5th edition books come from them, and some of the games are being sent our way from them. And we really appreciate when gaming companies take an interest in what we're doing. And that kind of goes back into a previous question from early in the episode, where it's like, well, what's the next game system that you're going to do? If someone's sending us like Dresden Files, Fate Accelerated, that's something that's certainly up there as a possibility down the line.
Hint, hint.
As we get to it. Well, I think that's Brian. Don't look at Brian. Brian's looking at me to play that game. So
I already did Fate.
I was just hinting to send.
Oh, no, we'll have a bigger discussion on that.
Hinting at a certain malevolent chapeau company.
Yes. I think that runs out of. Have you guys ever considered trying a game using the Legend of the Five Rings system? It's based on the trading card game of the same name and uses the 7th Sea roll keep dice system. Samurai, spirits, magic, politics, and intrigue. It has quickly become my favorite tabletop RPG system. With how many books and options that have been released for it, I'm surprised it hasn't been mentioned on the show before. Hoping to hear back from you. That is Tyler. So, Tyler, now we've mentioned it on the show. I'm familiar with the Legends of the Five Rings card game. Yeah. But I'm not familiar with the RPG.
I'm not familiar with the RPG, though they did create a setting book using it for 3.5 D&D, which I have played, and it was great.
And it was great? Okay, yeah. Excellent. That's good to know.
Kind of weirdly folded into the Oriental Adventures supplement of 3rd edition. And I got like a core book of one of the editions of L5R somewhere, but I never actually sat down and read through it, so I haven't had that experience.
Anyone else? Anyone?
Yeah, I've never.
You've played it at one point, Matthew?
Yeah, but I can't really remember anything about it. I played a lot of weird pickup games here and there at the store.
Yeah.
But I'm almost certain I sat down and played this one.
Okay. Rodrigo?
Yeah, never played it, but I remember seeing the core book around. It's really pretty.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for this mailbag episode. It's been a long time coming. We had a lot of stuff to get through. We always enjoy reading your emails. Podcast@majorspoilers.com, whether you have something nice to say, whether you have something hateful to say, whether you have a question, an idea, a suggestion, whatever it may be, just send it to podcast@majorspoilers.com. And sometimes I will forward those emails on to other people where it's like, oh, this is something that needs to be addressed really quick. Rodrigo, Brian, can you answer this question? Or, Matthew, have you done this or whatever? Other times we'll just, if I can reply, I will, but, I do read all of them. And, when it comes time for a future mailbag, I will put those aside for that future mailbag. So we will try to get some more of those in. Going forward, I know we were trying to do at one point, them either at the beginning of the show, which I think that ate up a lot of our questions back when we were doing a couple of them at the beginning of the show. And then we were trying to do them like once a month, but then that was eating into story time. So we will get to them when we can, probably quarterly, I think is probably where we will hit those. So, podcastmajorspoilers.com. Hope you enjoyed this mailbag episode. Thank you, Sam and Rodrigo and Matthew and Brian and Rob, and to all of you listeners all over the place. Here's hoping all of your dice rolls are critical hits.
This podcast is copyright 2017 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.
Studios Network. For more information about this and other shows, visit frogpants.com. Audio program so good, it's like you're there.